Welcome to Trust the Process podcast, where we'll pull back the curtain on new home construction, the real estate market, and the trends shaping it all. Discover the stories, insights, and expertise behind the process of building a new home. Join us, and let's build something great together. Welcome back to Trust the Process, podcast where we take you behind the scenes of real estate, construction, new homes, and everything in between. Thank you for joining us. Today we wanted to talk a little bit about a really important distinction in the new home market: production homes versus custom homes, some of the differences, some of the similarities, what's primarily out there, what you might be familiar with if you work in one or the other, or if you're looking for a home or building them, walking through some of those details and how they differ, how they're similar. We look forward to sharing some good information with you about that. We'll turn to our resident expert. And
I like that title.
I know,
That's
right?
a good title. Yeah, it's good. So,
A sash.
you're right.
So I think it might be helpful to start, rather than a compare and contrast, let's talk about one, talk about the other, and then talk about where those diverge.
Where they kind of overlap.
So let's talk first about production. What does that mean? What is a production home in today's terms?
Unless you live in a large, booming city, you probably don't know what a production home is. Production homes are what we might call a cookie cutter suburban house. Neighborhood, maybe probably 50 homes or greater, generally built by a publicly traded home builder. You need very deep pockets to undertake subdivisions at large, to hold the land, to hold the infrastructure, and the amount of manpower just in managing projects at large requires you to be a very well-funded, like I said, generally publicly traded company. So if you're in an area like our market, Southern Nevada, very booming Sunbelt city, Charlotte, almost all of Florida, Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Phoenix, and then some parts of the Inland Empire in California, all those kind of Sunbelt cities are going to have a really high presence of production builders. And they are really the main drivers of housing supply. On our episode where we talked statistics earlier, a lot of those statistics are pushed by one builder, especially in a local market like Las Vegas. It's 11,000 permits closed out every year of single family. I would venture that about 95% of those are production builders, and one or two builders making up 50% of that 95%.
Because those builders hold such a great share, everything that they do in the marketplace really moves the needle, and it sets the par for what the rest of the market is able to do and how things move throughout that echelon, if you will.
Yeah, it moves through that, kind of moves through that throughput.
Yes.
And if you look at why we're in such a housing crisis, it's because when you have 10 players nationwide, let's say 15 players nationwide, and in our market it's probably 7, maybe less, now that there's been acquisitions and there's been when you have even 4 or 5 of those 7 pull back and not wanting the exposure of building too many homes and then flooding the market, or their presence is in Las Vegas is just one shred of their business, they're not going to maximize all of their lots. They're not going to maximize all their potential out here. So what we've seen are these knock-on effects down the road, years down the road, that we're still dealing with, that when you're a big publicly traded builder and you have shareholders to answer to, and you have to answer to why you're so exposed in one market, or why you're so exposed in spec homes, and you have all this inventory sitting vacant and ready for buyers, you have to answer to those shareholders, and you kind of live quarter to quarter. And when you're a CEO and your executive leadership in those businesses, you're answering for quarter one in quarter two. You're not worried about quarter four.
Right.
You're not worried about 2 or 3 years down the road, quarter three. And you ultimately, really, it's not your responsibility to worry about the overall health of the housing market. You're fiduciary to your shareholders. So when you have such an oligarchy of home supply, we're left with what we have today. And that's why we make the distinction of what is a production home. I would say if you're a builder and you're publicly traded, you're for sure a production builder. And if you're a builder who's not publicly traded, but you probably deliver more than 200 to 300 doors per year, probably could draw a line even lower than that, maybe 100 doors a year. 100 doors, 100 rooftops, depending on what you're looking at. I'll use the word door
You'll hear that.
You'll hear that. It covers multifamily too, that are owned, that are for sale. Multifamily, and it kind of helps us to understand how many doors are being created in the marketplace. When you're kind of controlling that flow, it's easy to see how quickly you can manipulate the market unintentionally, even just manipulate the market by pulling back on your land development or pulling back on the amount of homes you're putting on every year.
Just to clarify, when you say doors, just want to clarify for the audience that if they're not familiar or if they don't know exactly what that means, it's not just homes that have been started. They are finished, turnkey, off the record. So
Yes.
that's a completed project home. So
It's
when
got-
they say they're doing 400 doors, they probably have 500 under construction
Right.
at that moment, but
Right.
it's that finished
It's
number
how
in
many
any given
addresses, how many keys, and how many families and
window.
homes.
Just to clarify.
Yeah, just to kind of give some
Right,
context. to
right.
that,
And because it's a term that you'll hear
Right.
again and again, I
Right.
just wanted you to have
Right.
real context for how it's used.
Yeah. So really, our way out of the housing crisis we're in is through production builders, like it or not. And there's a cultural milieu to this that people, there's an anti-cookie cutter, anti-suburban kind of bent that we have within our culture. And until we make major zoning overhauls, cities are in, zoned in favor of single family suburban tract homes. And that is our most hopeful way out of the housing crisis that we're in. We're going to need more supply. And
Right.
honestly, we're at a point where we just need to we're not going to reverse it. We just need to make sure it doesn't get any worse. So that's kind of how I look at that.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, production home, yeah, it's something that you're going to have limited customization, but predictable pricing. Your builder's most likely going to be able to give you a price down to the dollar of what you're going to close at. You might be able to customize as little as 3 things or as many as maybe 30, 40 things, mostly textural things, finishes. Sometimes production builders will let you go for a bedroom 4 instead of a loft,
Right,
things like that.
Right. Cabinet color.
Cabinet color.
There's 1 or 2 options that you
Right.
could build in for the countertops. Or,
Exactly, yeah.
Flooring color.
Overall limited. You can customize a production home, but it's not a custom.
Right. Now define a little bit for us the custom home so that we can see some differences.
So I think of a custom home really as anything that's not a production home. A custom home has this this context that it's always in it's always in an upper echelon buyer. It's always a luxury home, but not all. I would say all luxury homes are customs, but not all customs are luxury homes.
Okay, that's a great, yeah.
Right? And a custom home is generally built by a smaller builder, someone like myself or our company. And a builder's probably turning over fewer than 30, 40 homes per year. And you're generally involved in that process as a buyer or as a homeowner who's building to suit from the beginning. Not always. Our business model is a little bit different. We'll talk about that. I prefer to sell homes when they're nearer to completion. But they are still a custom home at that point. The company completely customized every aspect. And in general, no 2 versions of that home exist. Maybe 2 versions of the floor plan, but no 2 versions of that home exist. So that's basically the distinction. We cannot custom build our way out of the housing crunch that we're in. It's going to take production and probably some multifamily and many other inputs to get us to where we need to be have a healthy real estate market. But custom is an important part. Custom, especially in our market in Southern Nevada, and I will say in most markets, in most metropolitan areas, unless you're far out in the exurbs or in more rural areas, you might have a custom home that is within the median sales price of the county. But in general, in most metropolitan areas, custom homes occupy the top 3 to 5% percentile in terms of pricing. So they are important because every door added is, ideally a door someone else vacated.
Sure.
And it serves as a move up place to kind of unlock some entry level homes as those people move into those and either rent their existing home out or put it back into the housing supply. So they do serve an important function, but we'll never custom build our way out of our housing crisis.
Okay, so those are kind of the 2 opposing sides. Talk a little bit about a semi-custom and maybe the overlap between some of that. What's the difference if there were a third option?
Yeah, semi-custom is flirting with production and builders that are in semi-custom, which is really largely what Trust Home Builders is, especially as I grow the company and as I kind of build it in that mold. I feel that the semi-custom has the efficiencies and predictability of a production home, but the customization of a custom home. And we can kind of tighten up our timeline, whereas a custom home could take from land acquisition or from conception to delivery. It's really hard to get it done in under 18 months. Generally, it's 18 to 24 months. From, okay, we identified our parcel, let's hit the ground running. And that's a buyer that knows what they want, or a homeowner that knows what they want. It's still very, very challenging. It's going to vary by your jurisdiction. I mean, if you're permitting Southern Nevada is notoriously sludgy and slow. But if you're in a city that moves a little bit faster, you might have other issues that we don't have to contend with, such as weather and snow and seasons, for lack of a better word. Yeah. So I think that in general, it's an 18 to 24 months, whereas semi-custom, which is like I said, the mold in which I'm building Trust Home Builders into that type of business, allows us to maybe deliver a product 12 months, maybe shave 6 to 12 months off of the process and really cut it in half. I already have the floor plan. I already have all the engineering done. You maybe make some minor changes. If we can do as built in the field, that's great. If we have to run it back through the architect and the engineer, it's much faster. We're not working off of a blank slate. So that's kind of what a lot of people feel is a sweet spot. And as an early custom builder, I was able to do that, replicate it by not even listing the home, not even releasing the home to the market until I was 3 to 4 months into the build process, which represents about a year's worth of total work, 6 to 7 months of planning. And then permitting, groundbreaking, and all that takes us to about where the home is approximately 180, 140 days from completion. And that's a really great time to list the home. Some minimal selections can be made. We like to outfit our homes really well and make it we have a professional designer on staff, and he makes it really, really fashion forward and really kind of blending functionality and form together. So we don't see a lot of edits from our buyers, but it still happens. And if we can accommodate it, we do. And it kind of allows us to have that sweet spot in between. Okay, you're getting a custom product, and if you're not going to split hairs over your layout exactly, if it's a functional layout and it takes advantage of the views of the home site or home site specific conditions, generally you're reinventing the wheel if you're making a lot of changes to that. So it allows us just to have kind of the happy medium.
And I think about the end user, the buyer, if you will, and they're focused on that design process, but what they don't think about is the time and effort and, all of that infrastructure that goes into the raw land and everything that has happened. So you say it's that 24-month, 18 to 24-month process on a custom, but what the buyer doesn't know is that first 12 months.
By the time you see something on the ground, what that represents. It represents months and months of me pulling my hair out and $60,000 to $100,000 worth of soils testing, surveys, topographical surveys, civil engineering, drainage plans, mechanical, electrical. We'll go into that in detail.
You guys will learn over time.
Yeah, you'll know those terms. And that's what takes up that time. And until you're shovel ready, all of those professions have to basically do their work on the house. And then that's not to mention homeowners associations, approval, design review boards, city planning. If you're congruent with your zoning, you don't have to go through that. But also Department of Building Safety. There's a lot of signatures you're collecting before you mobilize your first crew to get started. Yep. So I try to head that off and keep them basically a shadow inventory. And as we go through the projects, that's really what we're seeing. We're going to see kind of pull the curtain back on some of the shadow inventory that we have that will slowly trickle on with more predictable timelines. Mm-hmm.
So categorically, those would be the three. Anything else you would plug in there, or anything else that we'll refer to as we do these? The series, or anything just in the marketplace that might fill in any of those gaps, or are those the three that you
in other markets you'll see some teardowns? You might see teardowns in your city. I would lump that into custom homes. That's the only category I can think that's not represented with what we just mentioned, and it becomes a custom the minute that home is torn down. And if it's not fully torn down, it's a renovation. Right? Okay. So I would say it lumps it all in together. Without covering multifamily, build to sell. Most multifamily are put in portfolios and rented out anyway. But there's enough builders, maybe if you look at nationwide, that will build and sell condos and townhomes to an extent.
So lots of differences. though lots of overlap. Really,
At the end of the day, it's housing,
process,
right? Housing is a basic need and a luxury good at the same time. And a production home can be a luxury good. It definitely does not have to be custom to be a luxury good. So, and a custom home can be basic housing depending on where you live. It's just kind of the nature of who built it, what was the process like, what was the end user's involvement in the process, and that's kind of how. But it's a Venn diagram, and a lot of it overlaps.
How does it affect timing in general? I know we talked a little bit about timing on a production versus timing on custom. Are there parts to the process that are just going to be longer by nature?
Well, in production, you're definitely having a longer lead time because you're generally changing zoning, you're buying big tracts of land, and you have a lot of front end work. Whereas the individual home sites, it looks like they just pop up like daisies. But when you're seeing a builder open for sales in a new home tract, you're probably looking at approximately 3 years of work that went to get them to that point. Identifying the parcel and, doing all the engineering and school impact fees and water impact fees and sewer, just general infrastructure, getting all those sign-offs done. And then, of course, developing a 200 home neighborhood is a lot more work than when I'm buying, a big portion of my business is still buying custom lots that are 100% ready to go. I can walk on that lot. It has the curb, the gutter, the utility connections are all there. Sometimes there's neighbors on each side, so the walls are already done.
Right.
And yes, that takes me longer, home specific wise, but it's a quicker turnaround. Ultimately, it is. Yeah. So I look at a production neighborhood as it's the entire project. When you break it out into the individual homes, they fly. But it's the entire project, start to finish, is probably 5 years from conception to the last homeowner getting the keys to the last door.
Yep, easily.
Right? Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Great.
That covers the distinction.
That.
Yeah.
Yes,
All right.
Covers the distinction.
Yeah.
And as we move forward and get into other conversations, those are things that will play into it. Now that you guys have a little bit of history and kind of the definitions on those and the distinctions, hopefully it'll help you play into what we talk about as we move forward. So look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Thank you for joining us today as we talked a little bit about production versus custom, semi-custom, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning into the Trust the Process podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify to stay in the loop with the latest insights, project updates, and everything in between. See you next time.